Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, kia ora tātou katoa e hoama, I tēnei pō. Mr. Speaker, I'm back. Mr. Speaker, from the Māori Party's perspective, I can cut to the chase pretty straight away. At the nub of this bill for us is the issue of human rights, including a person's right to a reasonable way of life, even when in prison, and I refer the House to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, under which our government is required to ensure that inmates are treated with dignity and that effective remedies are available when violations of those rights occur. Mr. Speaker, one would think that human rights has always been up there, or should have always been up there in our history, but when we look back, it hasn't been so. 130 years ago, this Parliament passed the 1879 Māori Prisoners Trials Act and the Māori Prisoners Act, and they were government's response, a racist response to the passive, non-violent land rights occupation. Well, what they talked about is occupation, but in fact a stake in the land for those people at Parihaka. And under those laws, prisoners were held indefinitely and without trial, contrary to one of the most basic rights guaranteed to all British citizens, namely the Magna Carta. Sir, as a part of that history, an important player at the time was a northern member of Parliament, Northern Māori member of Parliament, who by the name of Hone Mohi Tāwhai, who served in this House from 1870 to 1884. As history tells us, he was asked to sit on what was called the West Coast Royal Commission on the grounds that he would be impartial, not having been in any war. And from his part, he decided to take some pretty radical actions. He opposed, firstly, he opposed the prisoners' detention bill that was being rushed through the House. He refused to support blindfold such a hurried set of measures. He publicly criticised the shipping of Māori prisoners from Taranaki to jails in Dunedin because he knew there was just a move to get rid of them, and because he knew also that they would die in the colder climate. And he refused to sit on a commission with a gentleman by the name of William Fox and another gentleman by the name of Francis Dillon because of their involvement in the land confiscations in Taranaki. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Tāwhai, an honourable member of Parliament in his time, had one clear message during the discussion. Laws not made in accordance with Te Tiriti o Waitangi would be the cause of ill feeling between Māori and Pākehā, and he urged Parliament not to pass laws from which such evils would flow. Mr. Speaker, I recall Mr. Tāwhai as we consider this Prisoners and Victims Claim Bill, because it's desperately important that we remind ourselves always about our commitment to human rights, just as I also remind us of the 2004 United Nations Committee Against Torture review of New Zealand, which expressed a concern about, quote, the findings of the Ombudsman regarding investigations of alleged staff assaults on inmates, in particular the reluctance to confront such allegations promptly and the quality, impartiality and credibility of investigations, end of quote. Mr. Speaker, this is a damning finding which emerged, as you may well recall, from the inquiries into the running of the Mangaroa prison in Hawke's Bay some years ago. Here they found systematic beatings and torture of prisoners by senior prison officers. They used hit squads to beat the inmates, held inmates naked in overnight pen lockups outside, and denied inmates medical attention for injuries such as bruising, black eyes and cracked ribs. And I think the key here is that while the public expressed its outrage that the 9 prisoners were awarded compensation and a public apology, very little attention was given to the fact that some of the prison officers who committed these criminal acts were later re-employed and apparently compensated for wrongful dismissal. So, yes, let's have the debate about the definition of rights and victims, but let's also be clear that the people that we don't like aren't always the offenders, and the people that we want to feel sorry for are not necessarily the victims. And yes, we're comfortable talking about the role of the state in punishing offenders and depriving them of some of the privileges of citizenship, but we cannot sanction the violence against inmates that some in this House may well turn a blind eye to. Mr. Speaker, offenders lose their freedom when they get sent to jail, but that doesn't mean that they should also lose their lawful human rights. Imprisonment is the punishment. not the site for ongoing additional punishment that goes way beyond the scope of the court sentence, and yet we know that the rights of prisoners are breached on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, the Article 10 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights says, quote, "All persons deprived of their liberty shall be treated with humanity and with respect for the inherent dignity of the human person." And also says that, quote, "A penitentiary system shall comprise treatment of prisoners, the essential aim of which shall be their reformation and social rehabilitation." And yet, sir, the House has just spoken recently to a bill that would deny inmates the right to vote, and we're about to get another bill denying them compensation. Mr. Speaker, the Māori Party supports the rights of victims to be restored to their full potential, and we welcome a broader approach to victim support which strengthens and empowers individuals and their families. But we can't ignore the fact that prisoners who are themselves vulnerable to violence, who have nowhere to escape to and no one to turn to, often become victims themselves of brutal rape, assault and murder in jail. And these inmates won't be in jail forever. They will return to our communities, and if they have been taught about extreme violence, and if they have been taught that extreme violence is their pathway to success, and that a brutal ignorance of the law is acceptable and accepted management practice, then that will be the future that they will bring back into society. Mr. Speaker, the Māori Party supports a radical rethink of our penal system, but not the uninformed comment that the Ombudsman referred to in his 2007 inquiry into the criminal justice system, where he said that denying prisoners their human rights and booting them while they're down would simply not work. So, in closing, Mr. Speaker, we urge this House to think about ways in which we can create a more effective criminal justice system, one that punishes offending, supports victims and helps offenders become more positive members of our society. The Māori Party will not be supporting this bill at first reading. Kia ora tātou.